This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is books. I have Elsie Callender. She runs a blog called the Tea and Ink Society, as well as another website, and I'll be talking with her about her life, her obsession with books, and anything else that comes to mind. Elsie Callender is my guest. She runs a blog for books for women called the Tea and Ink Society, as well as another website. I found her a few weeks back, or maybe about a month or so ago. I was looking to do a show, and I'm still going to be doing a show about Lucy Maud Montgomery, the author, and the Anne of Green Gables books. And I ran across an article that Elsie had written about the filmic and television adaptations. And I looked around on her blog and thought it was interesting and wanted to do, before I did the Anne show with her and some other people, a show about her own website. So welcome, Elsie. If you could take a few minutes, give a little bit of background about yourself, who you are, what your interest in books is about, and then we'll just proceed from there.
Okay. Well, I'm Elsie Callender. I live in Alabama with my husband and our 3 kids. My husband is a teacher, and I have a background in teaching as well. I used to teach English to high school and middle school students. And I started Richly Rooted because I've always been a reader and loved books since I was a little girl. And everything that I chose for my life, as much as possible, had to do with books. So I was a teacher because primarily I loved reading and I loved teaching my students literature. And back in college, I majored in English at Covenant College. And I studied abroad in Oxford for a semester so I could be in the best possible place to study literature. And so after I was done teaching, I decided I wanted to do something purely for fun and for the love of books, but that would also help me connect with other readers and help book lovers connect with each other, and make money doing something I love to do, which is to talk about books and talk about them with other people and read them. So it's kind of the perfect solution.
So it doesn't sound like you're a native Alabama. Are you a transplant?
Well, I've always lived in the South, but I don't have the Southern accent. So I grew up in Savannah, Georgia.
Oh, okay. I have a friend who lives out on Tybee Island.
Oh, I love Tybee.
Yeah. So let's just talk briefly about the other blog that you mentioned, Richly Rooted. It seems to me, just from looking at it, this is about, I guess, wellness, life, dealing with kids and stuff. What exactly is that? And did that come before the book blog or not?
Yes. So I started Richly Rooted in 2011, and my journey is really getting into health topics and into natural living and sustainable living, like switching out, disposable products for reusable products, things like that, and looking into health topics. So that's kind of what it started as. And then since then, it's turned into more of a simple living, intentional living blog. And then as I had kids, I didn't really write a whole lot about parenting topics, but that works its way into just like the focus of Richly Rooted, which is, I guess it boils down to being centered in your home, and how to live healthy and simply at home, and then how that will affect, everything outside of the home, everything outside of that core base for you. So it's not as clear of a niche as Tea and Ink Society is, but I guess overall it's intentional, simple living at home.
When you were speaking and mentioning some of the things that it was about, have you ever seen a PBS show called P. Allen Smith? He has a show, I think he's based in Arkansas, and he runs a farm that he tries to do natural stuff and organic, and he has a whole show. That just came to me. I'm just throwing that out there. So let us talk then about the Tea and Ink Society. You said Richly Rooted is founded in 2011. Tell me then why you started Tea and Ink and what it's about, generally speaking, and then we'll delve more
Okay.
into it.
Yeah. So one thing I've always kept space for at Richly Rooted is just sort of write whatever I felt like to, and not like limit myself. So I wrote a couple of blog posts that were literary, that had to do with like why women should read books and why women should read fiction specifically. And then that posted really well. My readers seemed to really like it. And then I wrote a couple of other kind of literary themed blog posts that were hits with my readers. And I loved writing them. I loved talking with my readers about those bookish kind of things. So then I was like, well, I want to write more about books, but I didn't want to turn Richly Rooted into a books blog, because I liked how it was very open-ended. And so I decided to start a dedicated specific blog just for books. And so came up with Tea and Ink Society. And I think, I don't even remember, I think it's been going for 3 years. About 3 years ago is probably when I started Tea and Ink. And so it's just solely dedicated to books, especially classic literature, and talking about, classic books that have been made into movies, or classic authors that people might not be aware of because they're not Dickens or Bronte, the ones everybody knows. And then, and still talking about fan favorites like, Jane Austen and Dickens as well.
Well, you mentioned earlier about making money. So is this your job, these two blogs? And how do you make money? Do you do it by a subscription? Do people pay like $5 a month or something?
No, they're not subscription sites, but yeah, it's what I do to work from home. So my kids are young and they're at home with me all the time. But I can work on these blogs during nap time, or wake up early on a Saturday morning and work on them then. Primarily the income comes from advertising, from ad space on the blogs. And if I mention like books and blog posts, then I can link to those books on Amazon, and then get an affiliate commission from people purchasing the books through Amazon.
Well, let's talk then about your love of books, and then we'll talk more about the specific site. So growing up, were you an avid reader, and were you a reader of fiction or nonfiction or both?
Oh, yes, definitely an avid reader. And it was pretty much all fiction back then, unless I was required to read nonfiction for school. And I would always have these required school reading lists, which were a bit of an obstacle because I wanted to choose my own books, and I would have read widely without being required to. But I might have only read Nancy Drew or something if I hadn't been told what to read back then. So I suppose it was good. But I would try to get through the required reading as fast as possible so I could get back to my own interest and picks.
How about like poetry? Or is it all prose, or did you read plays?
My mom read a lot of poetry to us, but I didn't read much on my own. And she was just, reading a lot of the old, like the Romantics, and a lot of Stevenson, a lot like Longfellow. So I heard a lot of poetry by choice until I got to college, and then kind of got into poetry a little bit more on my own.
How about some earlier stuff like the Thomas Mallorys, the stuff, or the Shakespeare's era, Christopher Marlowe, Dr. Faustus, those kinds of things? Or was it mainly from the last 200 years?
No, we did do some older stuff. And I really liked Shakespeare. I guess I did do some of that in high school too, before college. But my personal preference is like Shakespeare on. So
now, when you decided to do the literary blog, it's a blog, or it's a website actually for women. So what was the reason that you made it for women rather than just for everyone?
Yeah, well, I had a clear picture in mind of who my audience was, and the kind of way I wanted to write, the way I want to talk about books, and the kind of person that I feel I can most connect with. And that's my ideal woman. I mean, my ideal reader is a woman. Not that I have male readers too, but like when I think about that one person that I'm writing to, like what what they're like, what their interests are. In my mind, it's a woman. So I felt like I could kind of be more, I don't know, more focused if I niche down a bit like that.
So when you talk, so you would prefer, when you recommend books, are they basically more Jane Austen than Charles Dickens? Is it more Toni Morrison than, I don't know, Thomas Pynchon? I don't know.
No, not necessarily.
No.
And like, I mean, I recommend a lot of books that might be more specifically like seen as like a man's book,
Uh-huh.
you know, like H. Rider Haggard, or, you know, adventure stories. Like, I love those too. But it's more just like the way that I'm designing my site to look is more feminine, I guess.
Yeah.
We have a Facebook group, and it's mostly like women in that. We're talking about Green Gables and, you know, our favorite literary heroes. And so, no, it's not, it doesn't really like seep over into like the types of book I write about. Yeah. It's just more, I feel like I'm having tea with a female friend, you know, when I write these posts. That's kind of what I have in my mind.
Just going to take a pause in a moment here, but it's interesting that you mentioned H. Rider Haggard, because I'm someone who's probably read 80% or so of the English language Project Gutenberg, and you can find him, Alan Quatermain Adventures, which was sort of like the James Bond of, you know, 80 or 90 years before James Bond. Why do you think, let me just ask you, I mean, number one, are you someone who reads a lot of stuff from Project Gutenberg? And why do you think that in this age where 70 or 80,000 classic books you can download for free, and yet people read less, it seems, than ever?
I do love Project Gutenberg. Part of that's because I don't really want to part with my money when I can read a book for free, you know, from the library. The library doesn't have all this that I want to read, so I love Project Gutenberg to find like those harder to find reads. You know, so like everybody knows, you know, most authors have a major work or two that you can easily find at the library, but if they have other stuff in their, you know, their bibliography, it can be a lot harder to find. So Project Gutenberg is gold for that. And I don't know, you said about people reading less these days.
Well, yeah, I mean,
think it's,
go ahead.
You know, probably because of, you know, like Netflix and streaming services. I think there's just so many options, and a lot of these shows are well made. And so people are spending more time doing what's easy, which is to just turn on the TV.
Well, you even wrote about that in one of... You wrote about that. I was looking in... No, that's fine. You wrote about that. I was just going through some of your blog posts that you even wrote about that. That I think was one of the reasons you wanted to do the book blog, was that you sort of fell into a rut of watching Netflix and vegging out.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just, our lives are so busy, like from day to day. But at the end of the day, you're just tired, and you just sitting on the couch sounds awful, awful nice, but just turning on the TV. But it's worth it to open up a book instead. It's a little bit of effort up front, but the long-term payoff is much greater, I think, than watching another show.
And if in that post, I think you said you did it specifically because you had children. Was that you wanted to instill reading in your kids?
Yes. Yeah. So I read books out loud to them. I want them to know that I read books on my own too. And then as I find out I have these little kids with so many questions, I want to be able to answer the questions about, and so I have to keep teaching myself. And the best way to do that for me is by reading and being widely read on nonfiction, fiction. And so I read for them too. I read because it's fun. It's, you know, my personal pastime, but also to develop myself for my own sake, for theirs.
Just picking up on the subject of reading to children, one of the more, I think, neglected areas seem to be kids' books. I mean, it seems like every celebrity, Hollywood celebrity, thinks they can write a kids' book, but few of them are going to write Pinocchio. Few of them are going to write Dr. Seuss. Few of them are going to write The Cricket in Times Square or Charlotte's Web. Stuff that isn't just, oh, I'm directing it to you because you're a toddler and you're not going to get it. But those books that I mentioned have a depth that a lot of what I find passes for children's literature these days really don't. I think just personally, a lot of children's literature is sort of, oh, aren't you a sweet little thing, rather than that they don't see children as beings that can understand things. What is your take on children's literature off the top of your head?
Right. So I do dip into the classics a lot because that's what I know and what I grew up with. So I'm not really up on, what's being written for kids these days that's really classic material, other than just, something I happen upon in the library that fits my son's current interest. But so I am falling back on the classics at this point. And there's this British educator named Charlotte Mason who was writing and teaching back in the 1800s. And her teachings was that children are individuals, and that they're smart, they're very intelligent, and we shouldn't give them what she calls twaddle to read, which is just these books that have no substance. And so acting on that philosophy, which, as I read Charlotte Mason, I agree with this. I'll read classics to my kids that they're certainly not ready to read on their own. I mean, they're just barely learning how to read now. But, it's these more advanced chapter books, not just picture books too, but actually reading to them, full, complete stories where there's, character growth and development, and things happen, and bad things happen, and good things happen. And I'm constantly amazed by how much my son, he really does get it, like when we're reading these things. Whether it's just like a big word that he's like understanding because of the context that it's in, or these concepts that are opened up just over the course of a chapter book, like Pinocchio, which we finished a couple months ago, that I always wonder, like, is he going to be ready for this? And then more often than not, he is. Of course, as I'm reading, I can, kind of edit out some stuff if I think this is something in particular he's, not ready for, would scare him or something. But children are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, I think, and they're ready for these chapter books. They're ready for the old stuff, even if the language isn't the way we talk it. What we use it for. They can pick up a lot just through context and through, you as the reader making an appropriate tone of voice and making it interesting for them.
Well, yeah, I know it's there's the idea that if someone doesn't learn language, like kids who were feral kids raised in the wild and weren't in contact with human society, if you don't exercise that part of that plasticity of the brain, you won't pick up language. And I think, furthermore, I would say that even if you get the language, if you give kids the literary equivalent of Cheetos every day, they're not going to, the brain is not going to be like a big, strong bicep. It's going to be flabby, and you need to challenge them. And it seems nowadays, especially with children's literature, there's, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Is it a cultural thing now that, they're little. We can't have, well, like you said, it's one thing if you don't want to be reading a book where there's, a serial killer coming after them. But, in some of this, I mentioned Pinocchio, some of those can be some scary scenes. But I think kids, once you get to maybe 4, 5, 6, they recognize the difference between fiction and reality, unless there's something wrong up top.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm afraid that a lot of modern day children's stories, they're more concerned for teaching like a certain viewpoint. Instead of, I don't know, just having a wonderful story to immerse the child in with beautiful language. and I guess, I mean, that's always kind of been a tension with children's literature, wanting to like instruct children and also give them something enjoyable. So I don't know what was your question. I'm not sure where I was going with that, but
yeah, no, you answered. You said you were a high school teacher. Where is it for English?
yes.
Because I live in Texas, and a few years ago, between other jobs, I worked for about a year and a half in a high school doing custodial work at night. And I remember going in, and I worked in the languages department, the English and whatnot. So I would see some of the books, and what amazed me, and I don't know if this is true in Alabama, was here in Texas in high school, they would give whatever book they'd give for what used to be called a book report. I remember I'd have to write 1,500 or 2,000 words about David Copperfield or whatever it might have been. But nowadays, here in Texas, they had this thing that they gave them a sheet and they'd say, okay, summarize in like two or three sentences what the book is about. Write 3 paragraphs about why you liked it or disliked it, and then you could draw a scene in the book. And I'm like, these are like 16, 17-year-old kids. That would be, to me, if they were 6 or 7, I could see doing that. But
right.
why are you infantilizing a 16 or a 17-year-old mind like that?
Right.
Is that the same in Alabama, or was this just a Texas phenomenon?
I haven't seen that type of book report requirements, or at least not in high school. My husband teaches at a classical school, and it's pretty academically rigorous, so that's kind of what we're used to.
Is he a college?
What public schools are doing these days?
Is he a college teacher? Or?
No, he's a high school and middle school teacher, but he teaches at what's called a classical school.
Okay.
And their focus is to learn Latin from a young age and use that as a foundation for other language learning. And they read great books, a lot of old literature from the Western canon, like Dante and Edmund Spenser. And so just the whole model of classical education is going to be a lot more rigorous than what I don't know, what the average curriculum plan might look like.
Yeah, and so. I would bet that most, I mean, not that I read Edmund Spenser or the Faerie Queene in high school, but I heard the name. I knew John Milton's name. I knew Shakespeare. I knew Boccaccio even, not English, but the translations. Nowadays, people don't even know that. And I'm not saying that you can't have modern writers get into the quote unquote canon. But there should be a balance. It's one thing if you're going to read Chinua Achebe, that's fine. But you don't necessarily have to kick out John Milton. You can be, have both of them. But let's get back to talking then about the blog. So we talked earlier about why you started it, and it's directed towards women. Just looking at the format, what are sort of some of the main purposes? You've got a blog, you've got book recommendations, and you've got a flowchart. Let's start, I guess, with the easiest one. What exactly is a flowchart? I've heard of that term in terms of a business, you do this, it's sort of like production line mentality. So what is your flowchart?
Well, it's something fun I wanted to create just for my readers and to bring new readers onto the site. So it's kind of like at the top of the flowchart, like you're asked a couple of questions, like what kind of, the point of the flowchart is to help match you up to a book that you should read. And so I start by asking a couple of questions, like what kind of genre are you in the mood for? And then whatever they say, we'll move them on down the flowchart to another branching set of questions. And then finally, I end up each trail with a book recommendation. So it was just something fun to make for my readers. And then I have it up as, for new visitors to the site, they can join my email newsletter, and then they'll get that flowchart as a welcome gift. And so it's just something fun to kind of introduce people to my blog.
Because it sounds almost like my wife is into this thing called Enneagrams, where she tries to match up people's personalities. It almost sounds like you're doing a literary Enneagram.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And I have kind of have a blog post on that in the works um, where I'm going to determine what I think are some of the Enneagram types for like popular heroes or heroines from literature, and then kind of do a blog post where people can, find their type, from literature. So that's I like personality stuff. So that was kind of the idea too with the flowchart, just to sort of match people with a book that they really love or can get interested in, just get people reading more.
So you have a recommendation section. Is that mostly for classic stuff, or do you recommend newer books? Is it more like a book club? What exactly is the recommendations section of your blog about, your website about?
Yeah, so that's a section I'm going to build out, but that's more of like some of my personal favorite books. And I'm going to kind of categorize it by era of when they were written. And I do want to take it all the way up through, modern literature too. And so, even though a big focus of TNX Society is looking at the classics, something I want to do too is help other readers who love the classics or who read the classics growing up, help them to find modern day literature that matches their taste, that kind of fits with that background of love for the classics.
So, for example, if you've got someone who filled out the flowchart and their flowchart says maybe they'd be interested in Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Stern or something like that, do you then try to find a book written in the last 50 years that has Shandy-like qualities, or what?
Yeah, so that's not something I've fully explored yet, but I am planning maybe incorporating blog post on that, sort of that idea, or working that into our email newsletters. I think that would be fun. So at this point, I don't really have it set up that way.
Now, I know just looking at it, and you mentioned using the term favorite. Do you ever recommend a book that you think is just literarily great, but you don't like? For example, I've often gotten into the argument with people saying that there's a difference between liking and disliking a work of art and recognizing its quality or not quality. For example, I watch Ingmar Bergman films, and I think Ingmar Bergman is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. But I can't say that I'm I don't go to a Bergman film for that warm and fuzzy feeling. And, it's hard to love a Bergman film, but you can't deny that his best films are great. Are there any books that you have read or recommended that you say, it's, but God, it's good, but I just,
Yeah, I think so. So one that comes to mind is Foe by J.M. Coetzee. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name.
Coetzee, yeah.
But it's kind of like a retelling of Robinson Crusoe, but it's told from a woman's perspective, and it's supposed to be kind of like this untold story where there's this other character that wasn't in the narrative. And so I really enjoyed it. It was just kind of interesting. And it had plenty of good material there for discussion, but it wasn't really, I guess I'd recommend it as like an interesting literary piece, but not so much the kind of book that I want to curl up with on a rainy day and read just for pure pleasure, for fun. I thought it was interesting, but yeah, I didn't really, I don't know. I probably wouldn't read anything else by him as my first choice.
How about the opposite, what they call a guilty pleasure, something that, oh God, this is crap, but I love it.
Well, let's see. I don't know. I mean, usually if I want to read something that's really like easy to get into, it's not something I have to work at it like a Dickens novel I love, but you have to like invest some time to get to know all these characters and plots. So if there's something I just want to jump into for pure fun and pleasure, then I'll probably pick up like a thriller, like a modern day thriller that somebody has recommended
Mm.
on their blog or that I've just heard about, and I'll give it a read. And then I can either have fun just enjoying, the plot twist, or I can have fun making fun of it when it's finished because it was kind of lame. So I guess that would be my guilty pleasure.
Before we take another break, I just was flipping through and I saw you have one of your recommendations of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which gained fame as a Hitchcock film when he did it. What I just wanted to ask off the top of my head, since I saw du Maurier, I always thought du Maurier was someone who really could have been a great writer. I think she had all of the tools, the wordsmithing ability, but she just didn't seem to push herself enough. Her stuff is good. It's a little fluffy, but I think she wrote most famously The Birds, the short story that another Hitchcock film was made of. What was your opinion of du Maurier? Because I get the feeling of reading her that she could have been one of the all-time great writers, male, female or not, but she just sort of, I guess maybe she got comfortable, she got enough fame or whatnot. What is your take on du Maurier, just off the top of your head?
I don't know. She's an interesting author. Like I even heard a few months ago that like it's possible she even plagiarized the Birds from
Really?
a previous short story for like this company,
Huh.
this publisher that she used to work for. And I think she had maybe been, anyway, I'm not sure what all the backstory is there, but see, I've only read 3 things by her: Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, and House on the Strand. And they were really good. And I guess she's not really someone I read for, for high literature. It's more just like a fun, like reading Agatha Christie. But so I know in my mind, I never, considered her as a possibility as like, one of the literary greats or giants.
Yeah, she strikes me as a British version of Dorothy Parker, if you've ever read any Dorothy Parker. Dorothy Parker was another woman who was she had the famous literary round table in the 1920s. And she was someone who I think had potential to be a really good writer, but again, she just sort of dabbled in it. But anyway.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know enough about her life. Maybe it was just she had other, things to divide her attention and focus. So I don't know.
So I was looking through before we started this show some of your blog posts, and you seem to blog maybe every few weeks, maybe a month or so goes between it.
Yes.
I did find some of the posts kind of, you had some of the good and bad Anne of Green Gables covers there, and I remember recently, even before your blog, seeing that one where Anne is a sort of a blonde modern cowgirl doing sort of with bedroom eyes, and it's like, what the hell is that about?
Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty shocked when I came across some people's interpretation of Montgomery's books and other classics that I've looked at. Just because while I'm finding like these Amazon, listings to link to in my post, sometimes I'll come across like, oh, like who made that edition? And is this for real? But yeah, there's some pretty cringeworthy covers out there.
Now, as far as I didn't ask you, where did you get the idea for calling it the Tea and Ink Society?
That idea came from my husband. He also helped me name Richly Rooted. So I just tell him what I want the blog to be about and kind of like the feel I want it to have. And then he came up with these amazing titles for me. So I kind of wanted Tea and Ink Society to feel like a community, which is where the society part comes in, because that's more calling it, a community. And just for people to feel connected to other readers, other people who share this interest. And then the tea part comes from, again, reinforcing that sense of togetherness. And, when you read a book, it's always more pleasurable when you have a nice thing to drink or eat with it. So ink is referring to, books, especially physical books, in that sense of something more, old-fashioned in the way of reading.
So how many people, or do you have any idea of how many people you reach through your website? And have you considered maybe doing, starting a YouTube channel where you could do, because it's much easier. One of the reasons I did my website Cosmoetica is now going to be, well, let's see, 20 years old come this January. And for the first 15 or so years, it was basically written stuff, but I just found I didn't have enough time. And so I've got 12, 1300 essays online that I wrote and another few hundred by other people who contributed. But I found that doing interviews like this or doing other things with videos was a way that I could just, in an hour talking with you, have enough material that would take me a lot longer. Do you eventually plan to have a YouTube channel? Or?
I've never seriously considered it because I feel more comfortable being able to sort of hide behind, writing. So it would be really out of my comfort zone. So it'd be something I think I'd have to warm up to the idea. But I do think it can be a powerful way to connect with people. It can be a lot of fun. So I don't know. I love the written word. I really love crafting blog posts and making them, to read. And then my personal way of consuming online content is usually to read, written content. And so, yeah, just video hadn't really come to mind. I mean, well, it's come to mind, but it wasn't something I was planning on exploring. So we'll see.
So I did ask. So how many people do you know? Do you know what your traffic is, or how many people have part of your newsletter?
I think it's about 2,000 that are subscribed to the newsletter now. And as far as blog, it's about 30,000 page views, but that's not like unique visitors. That would be less, and I don't remember what that number is. So it kind of varies from month to month. But
and is it mostly American people, people from America, or do you get from Britain or Europe?
There's been some from the UK and Australia too. But it's definitely mostly US at this point.
So let me just talk a little bit then about some of the things you recommend, because since it's focused on women, do you generally view women's literature as something separate, or when you talk about recommending or things for women, do you look at genres like science fiction, genres like political thrillers, or fantasy, or whatnot, and because most of the books, as you said, you're recommending the classics, but does the classics include, something like, name just came out, back in the 1960s, the science fiction author who wrote, The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula Le Guin, someone like her. Do you recommend books like that, or is it just mostly what would call classic literature, or just literary fiction rather than genre fiction?
Yeah, so I don't really. It never actually really occurs to me to recommend any author based on whether they're male or female. Because a lot of my readers do like, science fiction, by male authors, and I love this adventure genre and stuff, which is very male dominated. But so no, that doesn't really affect the recommendations I make or what I read or what I see like my readers reading. I feel like they don't really read according to, who the author is or even type of genre. So it's more just like, with having that in my tagline right now, a blog for the literary woman. It is just more of giving people a starting point, something to connect over. That were, people like me who might have had a similar trajectory with loving to read when they were little and, wanting a kindred spirit to discuss these books with.
So we're recording this in 2020. 3 or 4 years from now, or 3 or 4 years ago, the situation was different. 3 or 4 years, the situation might be different too. But right now, we're experiencing the COVID-19 epidemic. Here in the U.S., we're having a lot of civil unrest because of a lot of black people getting killed by cops and people protesting and rise. We have Donald Trump and Joe Biden running for president, and so when you recommend stuff, do you ever like go and recommend something that's for more directed to, say, minority readership, or black women? Say, like, they have Black History Month. Do you ever do anything like that where you say, well, I'm going to decide to recommend this kind of book this month because of what are you, in other words, are you affected by the things that are going on in the real world outside of yourself? Did they ever factor into your decisions?
Typically not.
No.
And I kind of do that intentionally.
Yeah.
For one thing, about my personality type, sort of avoid confrontation and controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while I think there's a lot of interesting discussions that could be had around some of those current event topics, my online home is not the space for that. That's not how I've created that to be. And then it's like, when I do focus on the classics, sometimes I wish there was more, diversity represented by, these big chunks of classic literature in these periods where there's so many novels written and it's not very diverse. Mm-hmm. And so, I do try to, in some of my, a lot of my blog posts, it's not all classics. I do try to focus, like, pull in some modern day literature, but I won't do it just to get the check mark of being somehow relevant to, the current events that are happening. If there's a way where I can do it naturally and where it makes sense for the theme of the blog post, or because it's something that I've read and I truly recommend and love, then I'll definitely do that. But I'm not scrambling to pull in stuff just for the sake of being relevant, or even politically correct. I know, not having like a blog that's so focused on contemporary lit, it's a lot easier to do that because a lot of times I am just, my focus is classics. Yeah. So it just naturally doesn't come up as much.
So let me just ask you a few more questions here, and then we'll wrap up. Regarding women's literature, I don't know, have you ever read Elizabeth Barrett Browning's novel in verse, Aurora Leigh? Because I think, to me, it's the best novel in verse ever written. I think Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a way better poet than Robert Browning, her husband. She's sort of the sonnets from the Portuguese or whatnot, and I think it's one of the earliest examples of a really feminist book. Have you ever read Aurora Leigh? And if not, I would recommend you read it. We had a little technical difficulties, but Elsie is back. Elsie, I was just asking about Aurora Leigh, a novel in verse by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Have you ever read it or not? Or?
No, I have not read that.
Oh, okay. Well, as I said, I would recommend reading that. I think if you did, you'd probably want to recommend it. Well, in your own reading experience, what writer do you think is underrated? I would actually say someone like Jack London. And Jack London was someone who was accused of plagiarism too. You'd mentioned that about Daphne du Maurier, but he wrote in a lot more. People think he only wrote like Seawolf and Call of the Wild and White Fang, but he wrote lots of stuff in different genres. What writer do you think is very underrated?
Well, I recently, a new to me author is Mary Stewart, who was writing about the same period as Daphne du Maurier. She started writing in the 50s and all the way up into the 1990s. And I mean, a lot of people do know about her, but she's not like the kind of author you would find on like a school, required reading list or something. But I recently discovered her and love her. Like, her writing is beautiful, and she writes these amazing plots. She kind of plays with lots of different genres. She's sort of categorized as a romantic suspense author, but she's a lot of fun, and it's good quality too. It's not just like she has a good way of with words, not just with creating, you know, an interesting twisty plot or something, but it's actually really beautiful to read too.
Mhm.
Her prose is good. So
And a couple of other questions, and then we'll wrap up. Who would you say is your favorite all-time author, and what is your favorite all-time work,
oh
if there is such a one?
well, I think they're two different things. So my favorite all-time author is Ella Montgomery. Um, just overall, she would be my favorite. But favorite individual work, I think, would actually be Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. So he's another favorite author, but I think Ella Montgomery overall beats him out, just for my own personal enjoyment. But
And I know who Dickens is. Who was Montgomery?
who was Montgomery?
Yeah.
Um,
I know Lucy Maud, but I don't know Ella.
no, that's what I said. I was just not speaking clearly. L. in Montgomery.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Lucy Maud. Okay, I thought you said L. Okay. Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Right.
Okay. um, and since we're talking about differences, is there a work that you think is maybe the greatest work you read, but like I said earlier, it doesn't move you as much? And same thing with a writer. Is there a great writer that you say, boy, this guy or gal is really good, but I just can't get into it?
Um, I'm not sure.
No. Okay. Well, so I just wanted to say then, I will below, anyone who wants to find out more about Elsie or the Tea and Ink Society or Ritually Rooted, I will link to those two websites below here. You can contact her or join her newsletter. Hopefully, in the next month or so, she'll come back and be talking about L.M. Montgomery and her work and books, along with, hopefully, I do now have one other person, and hopefully we'll have a trio, and we'll dive into it. Let me just ask you then, do you have anything final that you'd like to say to anyone who is interested in books or your website?
Well, there is something coming up that I'm excited about. I'm working on putting out like a printable reader's journal or companion, which is going to be something for readers to, you know, for you to print out and record like the books you read and your thoughts about them, and to kind of reflect on your reading year, to like keep track of your to be read list, or like your personal library, books that you've loaned out to others come to you. So it's kind of everything that a bookworm might want to keep on paper. So that's hopefully coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I'm pretty excited about it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for spending almost an hour speaking about your websites, and hopefully we'll be talking soon.
Yes, thank you.